Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go real deep into troubleshooting the engine, but just going through the big three: the fuel, oil, and the fire. So the fuel, basically, you want to get at least close to what the manufacturer is calling for. In this case, this particular machine, yours could be different, calls for 40 to 1. They give you a quote right here as well. They say for 1 gallon of gas, 3.2 ounces of oil. And this is the metric equivalent of that as well. You want to be close to that. It will run on anything basically close to that, but it runs better if you use their recommendations. The other key thing you want to look at, you want to make sure the primer bulb is still tight and not leaking. It's got a gasket around it. This is part of its own gasket. You're going to normally see a little bit of an air bubble in this. It's not a huge deal. This line right here is the return line. Seeing bubbles in this is no big deal. If it's cracked or coming off, all you're going to do is get a fuely mess here. Not a big issue. This line is the feed line. You don't want to see much of any bubbles in this, so when you prime the carburetor, do it nice and slow so you're introducing a minimum of air. Also, down in the tank, this intake or the feed line is connected to a filter. So you want to make sure that's not all jammed up with junk. It's pretty easy to reach in there and grab the line, fish the filter out, and just blow it out backwards. So instead of sucking air this way through it, you want to force air down through it that way to make sure you are getting fuel through that. And by the way, these lines have a tendency to get brittle. I actually just replaced my return line here, and I just stole this piece off of a weed insecticide that has a little hand pump. I just opened up the handle and cut off about 2.5 inches here, and replaced the old line, which wasn't this color. It was actually green. Not sure why they use green. And cracking on this is just going to cause a fuel mess. But you want to make sure there are no cracks on the joints on the intake, because you'll start drawing air instead of fuel. Okay, so that pretty much covers the fuel part of it. How about the air? Well, this is the intake right here. It's got this little latching mechanism. Yours may be different. You may have to unscrew something, who knows. But basically, this whole filter here is where it's drawing its air. And it basically comes in from behind up underneath here. So this edge here gets a little dirty sooner. And what you want to do is rinse this out, potentially in gas or painting spirits, turpentine. Rinse it out real good, and then take a little bit of oil in the palm of your hand and put it in here and soak that good and squeeze out any excess, and then go ahead and put it back in. It's really designed to be trapping the dust as much as it is the larger pieces of junk. Another thing related to air is the choke. As long as you have this out, check your choke to make sure it's operating correctly. When you move the choke lever on top, you should be seeing some kind of a mechanism here cutting off the air. It doesn't cut all the air out, because of course you need something as far as air when you're trying to run it. It's got a little hole right in the center there, just enough to get it going when it's cold. And then when it's cold, you want to just back that choke off a little bit until the idle comes to normal. So that's a really important thing to check as well. They have a tendency to miss the latch here, or because of all the vibration, they will just end up cracking and falling off. Okay, another thing in terms of air that goes, if you look inside of here, back in here is the muffler. If you have been running this engine outside of the gas oil specs that the manufacturer recommends, you have a really good chance of gooing up, if you've gone a little bit rich on the oil, of gooing that carburetor up where the exhaust exit. Here about, I don't know, 15 years ago, we had a little weed eater we couldn't get running, and used to be these exhausts were exposed, and it never occurred to us that it was due to back pressure, where the exhaust could not exit. It's sort of like the old Columbo trick of sticking a raw potato into an exhaust pipe and the engine not starting. That's pretty much the same deal. So for air, you need to check not only the intake, but the exhaust as well. Okay, and the last thing we're going to call fire. Here's the spark plug. Here's the lead to it. You can basically just reach in here and pull that off. I frankly, in my years on this earth, have never had a spark plug go bad. Have I had them get fouled up and more or less unusable? Yeah, but for the most part, they always work. But there's always a chance that the electrical system, magneto, the transformer rectifier, whatever on this engine has gone bad, which would be causing no spark. Could potentially you still have a bad spark plug? Yeah, sure. So the easy way to check these, and on this engine, it's not all that easy. You almost have to take off the guard so that you can access the head. You're going to pull the lead, undo the spark plug, stick the spark plug back into the lead, and then when grabbing the insulated portion of that lead, touch the spark plug, the base of the spark plug, without screwing it back in because you have to see the electrode on it. Touch that to the head of the engine and go ahead and turn it over a few times. It may be hard to see during the daylight, but in shade, you should see a little spark jumping in that electrode on the spark plug. What you want to do is, again, clean the spark plug up first. To clean between the two electrodes, take a dollar bill, fold it up, and run it through those two electrodes, and you'll shine the negative up and you'll shine the positive up, and that way if it's still not sparking, it could potentially be a spark plug, although again, that's fairly unusual. Okay, so now, assuming that you've been able to get it running, or at least popping, where you can tell it's trying to start, but it's just not quite able. So this is the real basis for a good running two-stroke engine. And this basically applies to even today's two-strokes that are not oil injected. This one is not. It's a premix. So what the manufacturers have done is they have buried these two jets. This is a low speed here. This is a high speed. You have to look pretty closely to tell the difference. Right here, we can actually see the letter L. So that means this one right here is the low speed. They do not label the other one because they don't need to. If you know one, basically you know the other. Not only have they buried them in a protective case here, which again, I have cut away, so don't go so much by that. But they've also put proprietary heads on these, so you are not able to turn them. What is the point to that? More dealer business, basically. I don't think the EPA has anything to do with that, seeing as how keeping these things well adjusted is good for the environment. It's very good. So to defeat that, here is what I did. Part of it was probably unnecessary, but this is the other part to the protective shield or tube that those two screws are sat down into. You basically couldn't access them, and the shield was so tight to the screw, I don't even know what a dealer would use to get into those. So here's the easy way. This is not the way I did it, but here's the easy way. Take a small hacksaw blade or a Dremel cutter and just go down without this shield on here again, and that means taking the shield off. When you pop the air filter, the screws to the carburetor are right underneath the filter. You can do this with the carburetor on or with it off. You would have to disconnect the throttle, no big deal. And by the way, you want to make sure your throttle is working too here. That's fairly obvious. That's part of the air and gas, actually. And it gives you better access. So assume this isn't here. I was going to actually cut that away so I'd have access in the future, but it's not an issue now. And what you can do is take your grinding wheel and grind a slot right on top of that screw head. And the same on the other one. I decided to just go ahead and free these up, so if I needed to get in there with the pliers, I could grab them as well. That's probably overkill. So now, again, this slot that I created here in the screw, that was not there. I regret not getting a picture of this before I started working on it. That slot was not there. I created both these slots so that I could use any old screwdriver to get in there and adjust these. And again, with a little hacksaw, it'd be pretty hard to do on the machine, but once this cover's off, you might be able to. It's hard to say. It's certainly not as easy as using one of these. Okay, so now, assuming you have gained access to your low speed and high speed jet. Low speed is just what you think. It's for idle only. So if your weed eater / string trimmer is not working correctly, here's what you want to do. Go to a standard setting. The owner's manuals, for the most part, do not any longer address a standard setting because the dealer knows what it is. They don't want you to, so you have to go to the dealer. But generally speaking, does this apply to all machines? No, but for generally speaking, for two strokes, you want to turn both of these all the way in until you feel resistance. Then stop. Do not over tighten those. You will ruin your carburetor. It will never work the same again. On this carburetor here, these two screws have O-rings around them to create friction. So when you screw this in and screw this out, they're fairly tight. They're fairly tight. So when you feel it want to stop, stop. Don't go any further. On the low speed jet, once you've screwed it all the way in, turn it one turn out. So going in is clockwise, one turn then counterclockwise coming out. On the high speed, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to screw it in until you feel the resistance. And again, they screw in kind of hard because of the O-rings. That's what you want. You don't want the vibration of the engine changing the adjustment of these screws. And plus, it makes for an air seal as well. So on the high speed, you're going to go all the way in. You're going to turn it a turn and a half out. So just kind of keep track. You know, notice where your slot is, and then one turn out, 360, another half a turn, 180 degrees. And that's a general place to start. Then you're going to go ahead and try to start it. Most of these have no on-off. It's just a matter of putting the choke on, doing your primer bulb here nice and easy until you see a nice clear flow through the intake line. And then go ahead and crank on it until you get it firing. Once it's wanting to fire, you might actually be able to catch it in one of those fires. This is the warm-up position here in number 2. As you can see, the little symbol here, it allows a little bit more air versus fuel. This is mostly fuel here, which you want a nice rich setting to get it started. And this is your warm-up position right here. So, once you get her running, even if it's spitting and coughing or whatever, if it is, you might try taking a little bit more choke off, get a little bit more. If that proves it, keep going until you got somewhat of a good idle. If not, go ahead and put it back here, even if it's coughing and spitting and whatever. You're going to want to warm the engine up for a minimum of 2 minutes, even if it's 90 degrees out. These things run so much better in warm temperatures when the engine is thoroughly warmed up. And by the way, if it's really a cold spring day, you might want to think about storing this, in your garage where it's a little bit warmer, because a warm carb and warm fuel starts and runs better than cold. Okay, so you've got it warmed up. What you're going to adjust first is the easiest one, and it will also tend to really thoroughly warm the engine up, is the high speed. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab my throttle, and I'm going to try to go to high speed. See if it will run at full throttle. What you want to do is you want to be able to do a jam acceleration without the engine faltering. If it's giving you a problem, here's what you're going to want to do. Take your little screwdriver, and this is not the easiest thing in the world to do either when it's running, because obviously the engine is vibrating, so it might actually take 2 people. I was able to do it myself, but I've been doing these for quite some time. So get it into your high-speed jet, give her full throttle. Then go ahead and start opening, which is counterclockwise. Start turning it more open and see if it runs better. If it does, keep going until the RPMs start to drop off. Then stop with this. Keep it wide open, put your screwdriver back in, and then start closing it until you notice an RPM drop off, then stop. Notice where you stopped and where you started, and then go to that halfway position. And she should be at the point where it's going to run the very best. Then go ahead and back off the throttle and see how it's idling. Without touching the throttle, take your screwdriver again and do the same operation. And I always go to open first, because opening it is usually always riching it. Sometimes the air, or the low speed screw is based on air. Most of the time it's fuel. So I'm assuming it's fuel on this, so I'm going to try to richen it. I'm just going to open it up a little bit at a time and see if it idles a little cleaner, a little faster. Once it starts to bog down, stop, notice that position, now start closing it again. Keep closing, keep closing. You shouldn't have to go more than about a half turn from where you started, and you'll see the RPMs back off again. Then go to that halfway point, and there is your best idle position. You shouldn't have to have any choke at this point. I failed to mention knocking the choke off fully, especially once you go to doing the high. You're not going to want to do that with half throttle on. You're going to want to have the choke totally off. You want to always tune it to run perfectly with the choke off. If you find you're having to run it with the choke partly on or whatever, it means there's an issue with probably the high-speed adjustment screw. Okay, guys, and hopefully after this, this trimmer here is 12 years old, and it still runs like the day I bought it. As a matter of fact, it wasn't, well, it actually was tuned pretty well. My leaf blower isn't tuned very well from the factory, but this one is. So any questions, guys, leave them in the comments. Always happy to hear from you. If this has helped you, give me a thumbs up. God bless. Keep up the great work. We'll catch you on the next one.